Beloved, hear me today. There is a force that has stalked your destiny long enough. I can feel it in this room, that invisible weight pressing on hearts, that whisper that tells you not today, that lie that says you're not enough. But I came to announce to every spirit listening, fear is a curse, and its time has expired. Some of you have been negotiating with what God told you to cast out. You've been tolerating what you should be trampling. Fear has sat at your table, slept in your decisions, and crept into your prayers. But not after today. Something is shifting. I sense courage rising, clarity forming, faith awakening, because heaven is about to expose the thing that has been holding you back. Tonight, we're not here for another comforting message. We are here for emancipation. We are here for spiritual eviction. We are here to declare to every chain, every shadow, every lie of the enemy, your assignment is broken. Get ready, because as this word goes forth, fear is about to lose its grip, and you are about to step into the future it tried to steal. Fear is not just an emotion. It is a spiritual force engineered to distort who you are, sabotage what you carry, and paralyze where you're called to go. When we speak of fear as a curse, we're identifying it as a cycle, a pattern, a generational intruder that entangles itself around identity until you no longer see yourself through the eyes of God, but through the lens of intimidation, inadequacy, and imagined defeat. Fear seeks to terraform your inner landscape. It wants to rewrite your mental blueprint, alter your emotional chemistry, and modify your spiritual posture so that you live beneath your divine capacity. It whispers lies until they echo louder than truth, turning potential into hesitation, confidence into self-questioning, vision into blurred shadows. It is a master manipulator, a silent architect of limitation, constructing invisible fences around your destiny. Fear does not need to shout. It simply needs to suggest. It needs only a moment of agreement, a seed of doubt, a crack in confidence. Once welcomed consciously or unconsciously, it begins its work. It disfigures the boldness you were born with. It distorts the dreams you have carried since childhood. It reshapes your internal narrative until you begin to interpret your life from a place of survival rather than significance. Fear is the great identity thief. It doesn't always steal your resources, your opportunities, or your relationships first. It steals times you asterisk. It disconnects you from your true self, the fearless self, the faith-driven self, the purpose-oriented self, the self that heaven recognizes and hell fears. Every curse has an assignment, and the assignment of fear is to keep you from recognizing who you are in God. Because once you understand your identity, you become unstoppable. Hell does not fear your personality, your talent, your charisma, or your background. Hell fears your realization. Hell fears the moment you awaken to your authority, your calling, your anointing, your spiritual inheritance. So fear works overtime to keep you spiritually amnesic. It convinces you to downplay your gifts, shrink your presence, silence your voice, and delay your obedience. It pushes you to believe that the giant in front of you is more real than the God within you. Fear does not simply paralyze destiny through dramatic moments of terror. Often it works through subtle internal conversations, quiet hesitations, second-guessing, imagining the worst-case scenario, anticipating failure before trying. Fear makes you live defensively rather than creatively. It has you protecting what you have instead of pursuing what you're promised. It locks you into the prison of possibilities never attempted. It is a curse because it multiplies itself through thought patterns, emotional reactions, and habitual responses. One fearful thought reproduces into 10. One anxious moment spirals into a lifestyle of caution. One insecure belief becomes a filter through which you interpret every opportunity, every challenge, and every divine instruction. Fear distorts identity by creating a counterfeit version of yourself, one who is overly cautious, overly controlled, overly concerned about opinions, overly attached to comfort. Fear convinces you that risk is dangerous, when in reality, stagnation is far more deadly to destiny. Fear convinces you that playing small keeps you safe, when in reality, playing small suffocates your spirit. Fear convinces you that delaying obedience gives you time to prepare, when in reality, delaying obedience gives the enemy time to build stronger strongholds. You were never meant to live under the dictatorship of fear. You were created to live in dominion, authority, and clarity. But fear breaks that internal compass. It makes you doubt your instincts. It makes you mistrust your discernment. It makes you question your worthiness. It makes you edit your personality to fit rooms where God intended you to stand out. It makes you misinterpret divine opportunities as dangerous risks and divine confrontations as personal attacks. Fear warps your discernment so severely that what is meant to promote you feels like a threat, and what is meant to threaten you feels comfortable. There are people who have spent years stuck in the same chapter of life simply because fear has convinced them it is safer to stay where they are than to become who they are called to be. Destinies have been delayed not because of lack of potential, but because of a distorted sense of self. Fear doesn't just keep you from stepping forward, it makes you believe you're unprepared, incapable, or undeserving of stepping forward. It attaches shame to your ambition. It attaches guilt to your growth. It attaches anxiety to your assignments. It tries to redefine you from the outside in through circumstances, through past failures, through mishandled relationships, through painful experiences until your identity becomes entangled with your history instead of your calling. Fear works generationally. It passes from environment to environment, family to family, mindset to mindset. Children raised in fearful households often grow into adults who internalize fear as normal. They may call it caution, wisdom, or responsibility, but beneath the language is a spirit that conditions them to avoid risk, avoid conflict, avoid exposure, avoid visibility. Fear convinces people that dreaming is dangerous, that wanting more is selfish, that believing big is unrealistic. Generational fear often disguises itself as tradition, culture, or common sense. But if it restricts identity, it is not wisdom, it is bondage. Fear is a curse because it makes you build altars to false narratives. You begin to worship limitations instead of possibilities. You begin to rehearse excuses instead of declarations. You begin to respect obstacles more than you honor God's authority. Fear trains you to exalt the problem higher than the promise. It makes mountains look bigger and God look smaller. It pushes you to magnify what might go wrong instead of what God has already made right. And with each repetition of fear-based thinking, the curse tightens its grip, reinforcing a distorted identity until you no longer recognize the bold, courageous, anointed, and powerful person you were uniquely crafted to be. Fear paralyzes destiny by immobilizing action. It freezes movement. It suffocates initiative. Destiny requires motion steps of faith, hard decisions, uncomfortable leaps. But fear traps you in contemplation without commitment. It keeps you planning without progressing, dreaming without doing, preparing without launching. Fear produces spiritual procrastination. You tell yourself you're waiting on the right time when in truth, time is waiting on you. Fear convinces you that you must have everything figured out, every detail secured, every risk mitigated before you move. But that is not faith. That is captivity disguised as caution. Fear makes you loyal to environments that no longer match your identity. It keeps you in jobs that drain you, relationships that diminish you, patterns that deplete you. It makes the familiar feel safer than the future. It causes you to confuse comfort with calling. You stay because leaving feels too risky. You tolerate because confronting feels too intense. You comply because changing feels too overwhelming. And all the while, fear strengthens its grip by making you believe that staying stuck is the safest choice. Fear distorts your spiritual identity by attacking the very core of who you are, your belief system. If it can corrupt your belief about yourself, it can control your decisions. If it can control your decisions, it can dictate your destiny. Fear is not after your emotions, it is after your purpose. It does not care if you feel confident or insecure in the moment. It cares whether you ever step into the fullness of your assignment. So it fights you internally long before you ever encounter an external challenge. The battle begins in your mind, your thoughts, your interpretations, your expectations, your self-talk. Fear is an enemy that does not need a sword. It only needs a suggestion. And once you agree with that suggestion, the curse begins to construct walls, barriers, and ceilings around your life. Fear influences how you show up in the world. It alters your posture, your tone, your presence. It makes you speak smaller, dream smaller, walk smaller. It dims your light because you're afraid your brilliance will intimidate others or expose you to criticism. It silences your voice because you fear rejection, misunderstanding, or failure. It makes you hide your uniqueness because you fear you will not fit in. But you were never designed to fit in. You were created to stand out, lead, influence, and transform. Fear pushes you into the background when God has called you to the forefront. Fear attacks your sense of worthiness. It convinces you that you must earn what God has already given you. It persuades you that you're not ready for blessings, opportunities, elevation, or visibility. It conditions you to approach life apologetically, as though you must justify your existence or explain your calling. But you were chosen before you were born. You were set apart before you had a past. You were validated by God long before anyone ever had an opinion about you. Fear tries to rewrite that story by making you believe you're disqualified. But the only thing fear can disqualify is the version of you that listens to it. Fear manipulates memory. It exaggerates your failures and minimizes your victories. It replays the moments you stumbled while muting the moments you triumphed. It reminds you of who hurt you but hides who healed you. It magnifies your flaws while diminishing your strengths. Fear trains you to remember the wrong things, and when memory is distorted, identity becomes distorted. Fear also manipulates imagination. It paints vivid pictures of rejection, embarrassment, loss, and disappointment. It uses the canvas of your mind to create outcomes that have not happened and may never happen. It hijacks your creativity and uses it against you. The same imagination that could be building dreams becomes consumed with predicting disaster. And the more you meditate on what you fear, the more power you give it. Fear grows where focus flows. Fear seeks to convince you that you are alone. It isolates you internally, even when you're surrounded by people. It whispers that no one understands, no one sees you, no one supports you, no one believes in you. Isolation fuels insecurity. Insecurity fuels inaction. Inaction fuels destiny paralysis. The curse deepens not because fear becomes stronger, but because you begin to feel smaller. Fear does not need to destroy you to win. It only needs to distract you. It only needs to delay you. It only needs to cause enough hesitation that destiny passes by. It does not need you to collapse. It only needs you to stand still. Fear's ultimate goal is not terror, it is stagnation. Its objective is to keep you from awakening to the truth of who you are. Because when you finally recognize your identity, fear loses all power over you. Confronting fear is not simply about rejecting a feeling, it is about reclaiming the authority that fear has attempted to occupy within your inner world. When you confront fear, you are not merely pushing back against an emotion, you are declaring war on an entire system of thought designed to restrict your destiny. The gateway to unlocking divine potential is often hidden behind the very thing you have avoided, resisted, or surrendered to. This is why fear fights so fiercely. It knows that once you confront it, its power collapses, its illusion dissolves, and the version of you that emerges becomes unstoppable. Fear thrives in avoidance, but it starves in confrontation. Every time you face what threatens you, heaven expands within you, and your capacity to fulfill purpose increases. Confronting fear is the birthplace of transformation. Transformation does not begin when circumstances shift. Transformation begins when the internal posture shifts. It begins when you decide to stop running from what intimidates you and instead turn toward it with spiritual resolve. Confrontation is an act of reclaiming sovereignty over your mind, your emotions, your decisions, and your destiny. Fear cannot coexist with clarity. When you confront it, you reclaim clarity, clarity of who you are, what you can do, and who God has called you to be. Many people underestimate the magnitude of what happens spiritually and psychologically when they confront fear. It is not a moment of bravery, it is a moment of emancipation. In confronting fear, you break the patterns that have kept you confined, and you activate dimensions of yourself that have remained dormant. Fear often disguises itself as logic, caution, or wisdom, making it difficult to identify. But when you confront it, its mask falls off. You begin to see it for what it truly is, an unauthorized voice, a counterfeit authority, an enemy masquerading as a guardian. Fear tries to convince you that it is protecting you from danger, when in truth it is protecting itself from extinction. It knows that once you step into the realm of faith-driven confrontation, its influence loses legitimacy. Every destiny requires a moment of decision where you stop negotiating with fear and begin dismantling it. Confrontation is not anger, it is alignment. It is aligning your inner world with the truth that fear has no rightful ownership over your decisions or your identity. Unlocking divine potential requires spiritual courage, the willingness to engage the very thing that has mastered you. Potential is not unlocked by wishing, hoping, or praying alone. It is unlocked when you take intentional action in the direction of your calling, despite the resistance of fear. Potential expands through pressure. When you confront fear, you activate capacities within yourself you didn't know existed because fear was suffocating them. Many people assume they lack potential, when the truth is they simply lack confrontation. The potential is there, buried beneath layers of hesitation, doubt, and self-preservation. Once those layers are disrupted through confrontation, the real self emerges. You unlock potential when you confront the fear of failure. Failure has been magnified in your mind as something catastrophic, something defining, something humiliating. But failure is not fatal. It is formative. It is a part of the developmental process. When you confront the fear of failure, you gain access to creativity, innovation, and resilience. These qualities cannot manifest in an atmosphere dominated by fear. Only when you embrace the possibility of imperfection can you step into the fullness of experimentation, growth, and discovery. The fear of failure keeps people from launching businesses, writing books, applying for positions, cultivating relationships, and taking risks that are necessary for destiny. But once confronted, failure loses its sting and potential begins to flourish. You unlock potential when you confront the fear of rejection. Rejection has shaped many internal identities, convincing people that they must shrink, silence themselves, or conform in order to be accepted. But rejection is not a verdict, it is redirection. It is often a protective mechanism that preserves you from environments that cannot hold your capacity. When you confront the fear of rejection, you are no longer governed by opinions, expectations, or external validation. You begin to live from a place of internal conviction rather than external approval. This freedom accelerates potential because you stop performing for acceptance and start acting from authenticity. Authenticity is fertile ground for divine potential because it allows your true gifts, voice, and purpose to surface without restriction. You unlock potential when you confront the fear of visibility. Some people are not afraid of failure. They are afraid of being seen. Visibility exposes you to criticism, misunderstanding, and responsibility. But it also exposes you to opportunity, expansion, and elevation. When you confront the fear of being seen, you step into the arenas where your purpose is meant to function. Destiny is not fulfilled in hiding. Your potential requires space, audience, influence, and expression. Confronting the fear of visibility releases the boldness required to inhabit your calling publicly, confidently, and unapologetically. You unlock potential when you confront the fear of inadequacy. This fear convinces people that they are not enough, not prepared, not skilled, not worthy. But inadequacy is an illusion created by comparison and conditioned by past wounds. When you confront this fear, you tap into a deeper truth. God never calls the prepared. He prepares the called. Confrontation activates divine support. It awakens a supernatural grace that begins to strengthen the areas where fear once claimed weakness. When you confront inadequacy, you give God permission to fill the gaps, amplify your abilities, and expand your capacity. You realize that your potential was never meant to emerge from perfection. It emerges from surrender, trust, and obedience. Confronting fear is a spiritual technology. It is a mechanism that triggers breakthrough. Every major scriptural moment of elevation involved fear confrontation. Moses had to confront Pharaoh. David had to confront Goliath. Esther had to confront the king. Joshua had to confront the giants of the promised land. These were not random confrontations. They were gateways. On the other side of confrontation was identity activation, authority expansion, and destiny fulfillment. This pattern reveals a divine principle. Asterisk, asterisk, your next dimension requires confrontation. Asterisk, asterisk, you cannot pray your way around it. You cannot fast your way around it. You must face it. Because what you confront, you conquer. What you refuse to confront, you empower. Fear loses power the moment you stop avoiding it. Avoidance gives fear space to grow. Confrontation exposes fear to truth, and truth always dismantles lies. When you confront fear, you challenge the narrative that has been replaying in your mind. You question the assumptions you have accepted. You interrupt the cycles that have repeated for years. You disrupt the internal agreements you have made with inadequacy, limitation, and defeat. Confrontation dismantles psychological strongholds. It interrupts neural patterns. It breaks emotional associations. It shifts spiritual atmospheres. The very act of confrontation awakens dormant confidence. It stirs resilience. It releases creative solutions. It opens pathways that were previously invisible because fear had blocked perception. People often say they are waiting for clarity to move forward, but clarity often comes times after times confrontation. You do not become confident first and confront later. Confidence is produced through confrontation. You do not acquire courage and then step forward. Courage emerges because you stepped forward. Every time you confront fear, you shrink its influence and strengthen your internal authority. Confronting fear is not a one-time event. It is a lifestyle. Every new level of destiny introduces a new level of fear. The fear may change its shape, its language, or its focus, but its goal remains the same: to restrict you from expanding into the fullness of your calling. This is why confrontation must become habitual. You must continually identify where fear is operating in your life, your decisions, your relationships, your finances, your creativity, your leadership, your spiritual assignments, and confront it. You confront fear through action. You confront fear through truth. You confront fear through declaration. You confront fear through obedience. You confront fear through movement. Your divine potential is not small. It is vast, multidimensional, and spiritually engineered. But fear attempts to shrink that potential so it will never threaten the systems of limitation that have governed your life. Confrontation breaks these systems. It tears down invisible ceilings and self-imposed boundaries. It destroys the internal narratives that keep you living below your possibility. When you confront fear, you reposition yourself for divine alignment. You create space for new instructions, new opportunities, new relationships, new strategies, and new levels of capacity. Every time you confront fear, your potential multiplies. The decision to confront fear unlocks innovative thinking, new forms of courage, deeper spiritual insight, and heightened creativity. It empowers you to take risks that produce growth. It develops emotional stamina, mental resilience, and spiritual strength. Confrontation transforms your inner world so profoundly that your external world must eventually respond. Doors begin to open because you now have the posture to walk through them. Opportunities begin to emerge because you are now positioned to steward them. People begin to follow your leadership because you now carry the authority to lead. To unlock divine potential, you must confront the fear that has guarded the gate of your next level. Destiny is not for the passive. It is not for those who wait for perfect conditions. It is for those who move despite fear, speak despite trembling, step despite uncertainty, and trust despite not having all the answers. Confrontation shifts your life from reactive to proactive, from hesitant to decisive, from intimidated to empowered. Fear is loud when unchallenged, but it becomes silent when faced. This is why confronting fear is transformative. It changes your relationship with fear. Instead of fear stopping you, it begins to serve as a signal, a signpost, indicating that growth is near. Fear becomes an indicator, not an inhibitor. When you confront fear, you begin to interpret it differently. You understand that fear appears not because you are incapable, but because you are close to something significant. The presence of fear often reveals the proximity of purpose. Confrontation allows you to reinterpret fear as confirmation. As you confront fear consistently, your inner world becomes conditioned to stretch rather than shrink. You develop the capacity to move into unfamiliar territory without hesitation. Your spiritual instincts sharpen, your emotional maturity strengthens, your mental endurance increases. These qualities unlock higher dimensions of divine potential, because potential is not released in comfort, it is released in courage. Every breakthrough you have been praying for is waiting on the other side of confrontation. Every gift you carry, every assignment attached to your name, every divine opportunity aligned to your purpose is awaiting your decision to confront what has been holding you back. Faith-filled action is the antidote that breaks fear's grip, because fear cannot survive in an atmosphere where faith is expressed through movement. Faith is not a feeling, nor is it an abstract belief floating in the realm of spiritual theory. Faith becomes powerful only when it translates into action steps, decisions, words, behaviors, and commitments that align with divine truth rather than emotional turbulence. Fear is broken not by intention but by execution. It dissolves when confronted with movement. Faith moves, and when faith moves, fear loses its jurisdiction. Many people believe they have a faith problem when they actually have an action problem. The faith is present, but it is unused, unactivated, unexercised. An unused faith cannot override active fear. Only faith expressed, faith embodied, faith enacted, faith lived can override the spiritual, psychological, and emotional patterns that fear has ingrained over time. Fear thrives in stagnation. It thrives in hesitancy, delay, indecision, and passivity. It feeds on overthinking and nurtures itself in environments where action is avoided. This is why fear often intensifies the moment you are close to acting on what God has placed in your spirit. Fear senses that movement is lethal to its influence. The enemy does not fear your dreams, your prayers, or your declarations nearly as much as he fears your action, because action births manifestation. Action brings heaven's intentions into the earth. Action turns spiritual potential into reality. Fear is threatened by your movement because your movement signals liberation. Faith-filled action is the force that begins dismantling fear's scaffolding, those invisible structures that have shaped your habits, controlled your choices, and defined your boundaries. Faith-filled action does not wait for confidence. Confidence is a byproduct of movement, not a prerequisite for it. Many people remain bound because they believe they must feel fearless before they act. But faith is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move in spite of it. When you act while afraid, you are declaring that fear is no longer your master, no longer your guide, no longer your determining voice. Action is a form of spiritual rebellion against fear's authority. It is a way of saying, I hear you, but I refuse to obey you. Fear shrinks when you move forward. It weakens when you stop negotiating. It breaks when you refuse to be immobilized. The more you act in faith, the more your internal landscape shifts, your courage strengthens, your clarity increases, your perspective expands. Faith-filled action is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, simple, unseen, but deeply transformative. It may look like applying for a position you've talked yourself out of for years. It may look like starting the business, sending the email, scheduling the meeting, writing the first page, joining the class, ending the relationship, or stepping onto the platform. It may look like setting boundaries, having honest conversations, saying no when fear told you to stay silent, or saying yes when fear told you you're not ready. These seemingly simple acts become spiritual breakthroughs because they break the cycles that fear has kept in place. Faith-filled action rewires your identity. Every action contradicting fear reinforces a new narrative, one where you see yourself as capable, chosen, strong, empowered, resourceful, and aligned with purpose. Fear loses power when confronted not by emotion, but by decision. Decisions create direction. Direction creates momentum. Momentum creates transformation. Faith-filled decisions usher you into new environments, new opportunities, new relationships, new assignments. They break the patterns of limitation because they disrupt the familiar pathways that fear uses to keep you stagnant. Fear is predictable. It uses the same triggers, the same thoughts, the same echoes from your past. But when you act in faith, you interrupt the cycle. You do something fear did not expect. You create a new path, and once that path is created, your mind, emotions, and spirit begin to adapt to the reality of movement rather than the illusion of risk. Faith-filled action invites divine partnership. Heaven responds to movement. When you act, God activates. When you step, God aligns. When you obey, God orchestrates. Many spiritual breakthroughs appear sudden, but they were initiated by acts of faith that seemed small at the time. Faith-filled action pulls resources, favor, opportunities, and divine connections into your orbit. It draws instructions, clarity, and guidance that remain inaccessible to those who stay stagnant. God often provides direction in motion, not in stillness. Movement creates revelation. Revelation fuels more movement. The cycle of faith begins where the cycle of fear ends, at the point where action is chosen over avoidance. Fear conditions you to believe that taking action will amplify danger, but faith reveals that taking action amplifies breakthrough. Fear makes the worst-case scenario appear inevitable, but faith opens your imagination to possibility, potential, and divine intervention. When you take faith-filled action, you shift your mindset from what if everything goes wrong to what if everything goes right. And that mental shift alone is enough to dismantle fear's power. Fear thrives on negative imagination. Faith thrives on divine imagination. Action aligns you with divine imagination. It activates the creative power within you and around you. Faith-filled action strengthens spiritual authority. Authority is not developed in rehearsing what you believe. It is developed in demonstrating what you believe. When you act on faith, you establish new spiritual territory. You expand your mental and emotional borders. You reclaim areas where fear once ruled. Every step in faith adds weight to your identity, credibility to your voice, and force to your presence. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, and show up differently because you are no longer carrying fear as an internal regulator. You begin to embody the identity heaven has assigned to you rather than the one fear has tried to impose. When you take faith-filled action, you also dismantle the stories fear has told about you. Fear writes internal narratives that predict failure, humiliation, or rejection. But every act of faith contradicts those predictions. When you act and see results, even small ones, those stories begin to lose their authority. You start creating new stories, stories of courage, victory, resilience, and progress. These stories become the internal evidence that fuels even greater action. Fear relies on false evidence. Faith builds on real evidence, the evidence of what God has already done, the evidence of the strength you didn't know you had, the evidence of progress you can measure. Faith-filled action exposes the truth about fear. It is an exaggeration. Fear inflates obstacles and magnifies difficulties. But once you act, you often discover that the obstacle was manageable, the challenge was navigable, the risk was worth it. This realization weakens fear's credibility. You begin to trust your capacity. You begin to trust God's guidance. You begin to trust the process. Trust is forged through movement. Without action, trust remains theoretical. Through action, trust becomes experiential. Faith-filled action also purifies motives. When you begin acting on faith consistently, you start discerning what is genuinely aligned with your calling versus what is motivated by fear-based reasoning. You learn to make decisions from conviction instead of comfort. You begin choosing purpose over safety. Fear-based choices often keep you in cycles of stagnation because they are made from a desire to avoid discomfort. But faith-based choices propel you into growth because they are made from a desire to fulfill destiny. As you practice faith-filled action, you gain the courage to choose the unfamiliar when God calls you into new territory. Taking action in faith also expands your emotional capacity. Fear constricts emotions. It tightens, restricts, and suppresses. Faith expands emotions. It allows joy, anticipation, hope, excitement, and passion to emerge. Many people do not realize how emotionally numb fear has made them until they begin moving in faith. Action awakens emotions that have been dormant under the weight of fear. It reignites passion, creativity, and the desire to pursue goals that once felt impossible. As emotional capacity expands, so does resilience. You become stronger, more adaptable, more capable of navigating uncertainty and challenge. Faith-filled action transforms your relationship with challenge. Instead of seeing challenge as a threat, you begin seeing it as an opportunity for growth. Challenges reveal strengths, refine skills, and elevate spiritual insight. Fear makes you run from challenge, but faith empowers you to face challenge with expectation. This shift is transformational because your destiny is intimately connected to your ability to embrace challenge. Every major doorway to purpose is guarded by challenge. When you develop the discipline of faith-filled action, those doorways stop intimidating you and start inviting you. Faith-filled action also breaks the spirit of perfectionism. Perfectionism is often a mask fear wears to appear reasonable. It convinces you that you cannot start until everything is flawless, precise, or fully prepared. But faith says start with what you have, where you are, with the understanding that growth will come through motion. When you act in faith, you break the illusion that perfection is required. You learn to value progress over perfection, boldness over comfort, obedience over fear. This mindset frees you from the paralysis that perfectionism creates. Every act of faith becomes a seed planted into your future. Action is prophetic. It speaks to your destiny. It declares your intentions. It signals to the spiritual realm that you are ready to steward more. When you act, you create momentum that aligns your environment, your relationships, your resources, and your opportunities with the direction of your destiny. This is why faith-filled action is essential. It creates alignment. Without action, alignment cannot occur. Without alignment, potential cannot expand. Faith-filled action transforms your identity from passive observer to active participant in your destiny. It shifts your life from wishful thinking to purposeful living. It gives you the ability to shape your future, influence outcomes, and open doors that fear told you were locked. Action is empowerment embodied. It is the manifestation of courage, conviction, and confidence. It is the declaration that you refuse to be defined by doubt or confined by fear. The grip of fear weakens each time you take a step in faith. One step becomes two, two become three. Momentum grows. What once felt impossible becomes achievable. What once intimidated you becomes manageable. What once terrified you becomes familiar terrain. You evolve, you expand, you rise above the limitations that once held you captive. Faith-filled action becomes the continuous cycle through which you break the strongholds of fear and move into the fullness of your calling. And hear me, there comes a moment when you can no longer negotiate with fear, no longer accommodate it, no longer justify its presence, no longer dress it up as wisdom or disguise it as caution. There comes a moment when something inside you stands up and says, asterisk, this is the last day fear dictates my life. Asterisk, that moment is now. You have heard enough. You have survived enough. You have prayed enough. Now it is time to move, time to step into the identity fear tried to bury. Time to walk into the assignments fear tried to sabotage. Time to reclaim the ground fear has trespassed on for years. You are not stepping out as the same version of yourself that fear once intimidated. You are stepping out as the awakened, aligned, anointed version hell hoped you'd never meet. This is your turning point, your pivot moment, your spiritual uprising. Heaven is backing you, grace is carrying you, purpose is calling you, and fear is trembling. You are about to do what the old you thought was impossible. You are about to go where fear said you'd never go. You are about to become everything fear tried to convince you you were not. So rise, move, act, step. Let fear watch you walk into the future it tried to steal.